Hey,
Okay,
hey,
we are live once again,
we are.
calling Christopher J. Anderson in
Guess.
Belgium.
That's cheap. Hopefully,
I wanted
and
to give
calling.
you. I wanted to let you say where you were.
Oh,
You
thank you.
know, it's all right.
Calling Rick Buyer in
My kind of town.
Chicago. My kind
Chicago,
of
my kind
town.
of
Yeah.
town. Everything's good and happening here. Welcome everybody to History Happy Hour, brought to you with the help of Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours. Chris and I may be traveling around the globe, but we always like to come home and do some drinking on the job here at History Happy Hour. And today we do a lot of drinking on the job. Let's face it.
On and off the
when
job.
we're on
Yeah.
the road as well. Today we'll talk about the Great Sioux leaders, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. And a big thank you to everyone supporting this effort via Patreon, especially our wonderful top shelf supporters. We really appreciate you and thank you all for coming. And a reminder that you can always find out about upcoming shows on our History Happy Hour website, which, Chris, do you remember the website?
www.historyhappyhour.something.net.
Yes, perfectly well
Hey,
done.
yeah.
Well done. And Chris, who have we got? We got anybody watching?
Yeah, we have Lydia. Hello, Lydia. It's good to see you posting your presence there. And Doreen, Lizzie Borden, who I miss very much from London, and the Templins, Ken Hartrop from Kansas, Frank from Idaho. So a good crowd.
Fantastic, everybody. James Stark, James Latin, Frank, Dawn. Glad you're all here. And so, Chris, have we got a quorum? Can we commence with the meeting? What do you think?
I think so. Shall I?
Well, why don't you do your equivalent of putting that gavel down?
The bar is open.
The bar is open, and then once again, we're serving up some history. Today, we're going to get up close and personal with Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, the two of the most legendary and consequential Native American leaders from the last century. They triumphed at the Battle of Little Bighorn and led Sioux resistance in the fierce final chapter of the so-called Indian Wars. But there's so much more to this story, and we're going to hear some of it from Mark Lee Gardner, who is the author of the new book, The Earth is All That Lasts, Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, and the Last Stand of the Great Sioux Nation. And I want to say that Mark is a major scholar of the West who's written books way too numerous to list here on History Happy Hour. Just trust me, he's written a bunch of them. And if they're as good as this one, they're good. We're delighted to have Mark Lee Gardner with us today. Mark, welcome to History Happy Hour.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this, especially the happy hour part.
How have you come armed to History Happy Hour?
Okay, well, I saved this moment to the Papa Top.
Ooh.
So this is Cayman Jack. It's their margarita, but this is the watermelon flavored margarita. My favorite summertime refresher.
I'm impressed by that. We already discussed this, but
canned margaritas. And what we really discovered is that as much as Mark knows about the West, his knowledge of canned margaritas,
yes,
maybe
even greater.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's pretty impressive. Christopher,
so
are you lubricating?
I am lubricating. I have a Jupiler.
Wow.
Okay.
Belgian
nice.
Pilsner. Yeah.
I am not familiar with that. I am going with a strictly American Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. But we are all in the cocktail mode, and so that's good. Mark, let's start off with just a question. Your book is a dual biography of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, and of course their lives are intertwined, but they're two really different people. I mean, they're both leaders, two very different people. Why did you decide to do this, let's say, as a dual biography instead of, biographies of each of them or a more general history?
Sure. They fit so well together because they were the two leaders who were most violently opposed to accommodating the white man, accommodating Euro-Americans, They were probably certainly the best known, other than say like somebody like Red Cloud, the best known of the Lakotas who were fighting encroachment by Euro-Americans into Lakota lands. But unlike Red Cloud and unlike a lot of Lakota leaders, Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, they really resisted till the end of their lives. They never signed treaties. They did not recognize reservation boundaries. And they were allies in that effort, and they were also friends. So it just seemed to tell this story from both of their perspectives and their people. It was just a great match, I thought. And I've done dual biographies. Well, I've done a previous one on Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett. And I can say the same thing that I said with that book. You can't tell the story of Billy the Kid without telling Pat Garrett's story. Can't tell Pat Garrett's story without telling Billy the Kid. And Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull are the same. You cannot tell their stories without bringing in the other, because they fought together and they fought to protect their culture, their people, and their lands. So it was just an excellent fit, I thought.
Well, I don't want to pile on because since it is a dual biography, but for those of us who probably aren't as well versed in this as you are, they soon will be after they read your book. But can you just give us kind of some background about these two characters and how they become the people they are, and add on to that? Are they unique amongst Native Americans? Given your knowledge of them, or are they sort of typical? Where do they fit into that story?
Sure. Well, both Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. Now, Sitting Bull was born about 1831. Crazy Horse 1840s. There's like 9 years difference. But they both come of age in a very challenging time in their people's history, because beginning, right around the time of Sitting Bull's birth, we start having whites, Euro-Americans, coming onto Lakota lands. Actually, you could even start with Lewis and Clark and the early mountain men, which, the very early 1800s. But beginning in the 1830s, it really picks up steam. And then in the 1840s, once Crazy Horse is born, you have a real flood of migration due to discovery of gold in California, due to settlers going to Oregon. And it's all going over the Platte River Road, the Oregon-California Trail, which crosses the Lakota's land. So these two individuals come of age and they become leaders during a period where they've met their greatest challenge. And that is how to preserve their culture, their traditions. They're a buffalo culture. So the way they survive is to follow the buffalo herds. And I'm sure, every school kid reads about this, how they use the buffalo for so many things, for their lodges, for their clothing, utensils, the bones for utensils. The buffalo was everything for their life and for their survival. And once you have Euro-Americans encroaching on their lands, and again, you have the immigrants, and then you have the gold seekers, you have the railroad builders. These are impacting their lives and their livelihood, and that they're also killing buffalo. They're building cities on former campgrounds. In fact, if you look at the establishment of Denver in 1858, 1859, that was on Arapaho and Cheyenne land. When Deadwood is founded in the Black Hills, that's Lakota land. That doesn't belong to Euro-Americans. So they have all these challenges trying to stave off and to protect their lands. And at the same time, they've got fellow leaders who are signing treaties. They call it touching the pin. That's giving away land. So Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse come of age during, you might say, both the peak of their buffalo culture, their horse culture, but also at the greatest trials that they are ever to face, that their people are to face. And together, and leading their people, as I mentioned earlier, they're the most violently opposed to accommodating. They're not going to sign treaties. They're not going to recognize reservations. They're fighting always for the welfare of their people and their culture.
So talk about a little bit about how the differences between them, because you you talk a little bit about their role being the same, but they're kind of really different in the way that they gain leadership and in the kind of leadership that they demonstrate. So give us a sense of that.
Exactly. Sitting Bull, and I should mention, to start with, both of these individuals were not, the sons of great chiefs. And one, in the Lakota culture, you could be a, quote, hereditary chief, which wasn't, if you're born into it, that's not that hard. But both Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, they achieved their status through their deeds. One of the things about Sitting Bull that I wasn't as familiar with, or was kind of eye-opening for me as I was researching my book, is that we always think of him as this older man. In fact, he was called an old man chief at the Little Bighorn. He wasn't expected to fight. He was 45 years of age. But he actually started his career as an incredible, fearless warrior. That's how you achieve leadership or status within your tribe. When Sitting Bull is born, he had a nickname. It was called Slow. And there's a couple different theories of why he was called Slow. One is that he was physically slow, which apparently was true. But even as a child, he was very deliberate in making decisions. That was a positive trait. He thought things out. This would end up frustrating white men later, especially his agent at Standing Rock, because he saw this as being, resisting. But he liked to think things out carefully. And so that may be another reason for that nickname. But as he matures, whereas he might have been slow and not always the winner in games or races, he quickly developed those physical attributes and was very fast and was very dexterous and excellent at the Indian games, throwing the hoop game, those types of things. And then on the battlefield, starting with his first coup, and a coup with the Lakotas is touching an enemy, killing an enemy, capturing a woman, those types of things, very quickly establishes himself as a leader. Now, Crazy Horse, and again, we can talk about the difference in their personalities, but Crazy Horse is very unusual. He's unusual looking for Lakota. His skin is very light. In fact, some people thought that he had mixed heritage, that he was a mixed blood. That probably wasn't the case, but again, it tells us that he had this light skin that was unusual. He did have the Lakota's dark eyes. His hair was actually curly, and his early nickname was Curly because of his curly hair. But he was very shy, and he would have this trait throughout his life, modest, reclusive in a way, enigmatic. It was really hard to understand his essence. He didn't like to speak in council meetings, whereas Sitting Bull, we know from some of the people that were in his camp, he was a practical joker. He laughed a lot. Sitting Bull loved children, very amiable. Crazy Horse was kind of aloof. And again, this was a troublesome for whites he had to deal with once he surrendered, because they took this very different personality, strange as, again, that he was, being indignant and aloof from them. But the one thing about Crazy Horse, when he showed emotion, it was on the battlefield. And as I write in the book, I certainly consider him probably the greatest Lakota warrior to ever live. He had like 7 horses shot out from under him in battle. And by the way, that's something you also see with Euro-Americans. They talk about, George Custer had several horses shot out from under him. That means you're at the forefront of the fight. You're risking your life. And Crazy Horse was the same. He had several horses killed while he was fighting both native opponents as well as white opponents. Does that answer your question, kind of? Or
yeah, I think so. Okay. So kind of adding on to that, could you tell us a little bit about the Sioux, about the tribe, and how, where they kind of fit in the whole scheme of Native American tribes, and
sure, yeah,
to be, so people know the type of people that these two warriors are leading.
Sure, and Lakota is their name. Sioux was the name that's a corruption of a French word, or and it's okay to use that term, but Lakotas is what they call themselves. And they're one of a number of nations that are on the northern plains in the 19th century, but they're really the most powerful of all these. I mean, they essentially force other tribes like the Crows and the Shoshones. I mean, they push them to the edge, to the west. And as Luther Standing Bear said, who's really important for studying this time period, he said that a lot of our conflicts were over these boundary lines, over hunting grounds, and so you have several tribes on the northern plains who are competing for buffalo and for horses. That's also a component of this culture. I mean, this is a nomadic people, and they require horses for both fighting and for moving. So they're often battling. For instance, the Crows is one of the more famous, but also Assiniboines, and we could name several tribes they come in contact with. But they're fighting for these resources that become even more precious as you have the Euro-Americans who are coming into their lands at the same time.
So I want to read you a quote that you use in the book from Fannie Kelly, who is a white woman or Euro-American woman. I'm not sure which I like the most.
Sure. You can use either. It's fine.
Yeah, kidnapped by the Lakota and later released. And she writes, "The youth are very fond of war. They have no other ambition and pant for the glory of battle, longing for the notes of the war song, that they may rush in and win the feathers of a brave. They listen to the stories of the old men as they recall the stirring scenes of their youth, or sing their war songs, which form only a boasting recapitulation of their daring and bravery. They yearn for the glory of war, which is the only path to distinction." And in some ways, Mark, the reading about the Sioux reminded me of Sparta. A very, very different, but both very warrior-based cultures. I mean, is that fair to say, or am I off base with that?
No, I think it's very fair, but I don't see. I mean, another comparison, and I don't really see this as that far-fetched. George Custer was called a glory seeker. Well, the only way you attained rank in the military was through glory. On the battlefield in the Civil War, there were literally thousands and thousands of men that rushed to sign up. They wanted to fight. I mean, politicians, leading citizens, they wanted to be a colonel or a captain or whatever. So I don't find it that unusual that you would also have the Lakotas, who, in order for them to achieve status, the same thing. The main path to leadership and status is through war and accomplishments and these coups. It was so important to the Lakotas that they actually, and you'll remember this from the book, they would make sure that when they, had some, amazing feat or some battlefield achievement, they made sure they had witnesses and who would attest to their bravery. Oh yes, I saw Sitting Bull do this. I saw Crazy Horse do this. And then they would draw pictures of their coups. They call it ledger art today because often these were drawn on stolen white man ledgers. There's a great example there that actually drawn by Sitting Bull himself. But to me, that tells you just how important battle was. The fact that, Sitting Bull's not drawing a picture of the river, or if he's drawing a picture of something he did that's important to him.
It's not a landscape. Right?
It's not a landscape. No, it's not a still life. It's a fight.
Yeah. So Mark, picking up on that idea of war, since it is a warrior culture, and clearly the Lakota are very successful at it, is there something about their way of waging war that makes them successful? Is it? Maybe you could describe, use one of their engagements as an example. But
sure.
Because also, building on Chris's question, you talk about how terrifying they are to everybody else, both other tribes and to the Euro-Americans. So yes. That's a great question. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. For the Lakotas, it was essentially trial and error, especially as they're encountering weapons that they have never seen before. I mean, the Lakotas early on traded for the medicine irons or guns. black powder weapons. They were quite common and available. But when you start getting mountain howitzers, and the Indians called them the gun that shoots twice because it had an exploding shell. First, you have the big boom from the cannon, and then way up in the air, you've got this exploding shell that sends deadly shrapnel down onto the warriors. So they had to learn how to, very quickly, because otherwise you take heavy losses. So a lot of this is ambush, not just ambush, but also a very fast hit and retreat. The Lakotas love to catch small groups off guard away from a military post. But one of their favorite tactics, which didn't always work, but one of their favorite tactics was to draw through decoys a force to a location where they could actually attack them, ambush them. And this, probably the best example of this, you asked for one, was what's known as the Fetterman Fight or the Fetterman Massacre in December of 1866. And Crazy Horse was part of that. It was outside this new military post on the Bozeman Trail called Fort Phil Kearny. Every day they kind of had this routine at the post. They sent out this wagon train, this wood train for wood, because it was a distance a few miles away to where they were getting the wood. And usually the Lakotas would have an attack on the wood train. Then the fort would send out a force to drive off the Lakotas. Well, on this particular date, there was probably something like 2,000 warriors, Lakotas, Northern Cheyennes, Arapahoes, and they were waiting over a ridge to the north of the fort. And it was the job of the decoys to this time try to draw that force that came out to protect the wood train, try to draw them over that ridge. And it worked to perfection. These decoys led by Crazy Horse were able to get in. And what's interesting is this military force was a combination of both infantry and cavalry. And they drew all of them, some 81 men, over the ridge. The cavalry, of course, can go faster than the infantry, which allowed the Indians to wipe out the cavalry first and then concentrate on the infantry. But every one of these men, including their commander, Fetterman, were killed. And it was probably the best example and the most successful ambush. And many times they would try this effort, try to decoy them away. So they had to deal with, this technology, these weapons, these mountain howitzers. They couldn't do an all-out attack on a fort, although they would try to catch somebody away from the fort. But it was hit and run a lot of the times, except at the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Well, and I want to just add on to that really quickly. Do you see their tactics evolving as they're dealing with more and more of these Euro-Americans? Or are they saying, well,
yes,
we have to find a new way to fight these people?
Their tactics evolve. I mean, one of and they do evolve and they change. And to give you an example, with Fetterman's men, especially the infantry, they have muzzle-loading muskets, okay? So the warriors know that if they can get most of the men to fire their weapons, that they have a chance to go in and kill before the soldiers can reload. And sometimes you would have leaders like Crazy Horse do what was called a brave run or a bravery run. And he would race his horse close to the enemy line, draw their fire, and this would allow his fellow warriors to run in and commit mayhem. Now when you talk about evolving, so the military starts getting breech-loading weapons, the trapdoor. Sometimes they call it trapdoor Springfields, and they also had trapdoor rifles as well, the carbines and rifles. They can reload much quicker, and so they have to adapt to that and know that we're going to try to get them to fire as much as they can, but we don't have as much time to go in because they just have to flip open that door and put another shell in. But at the same time, warriors are acquiring some of these same weapons as well. One of the things that fascinated me the most, and I wasn't really aware of, was that these Lakotas learned how to reload their ammunition. Yeah, they had access to powder, but they would keep their empties, and they had lead. They found bullet molds in the camp at Little Bighorn, and they would reload their ammunition. Because they wouldn't, it wasn't like they were next to a hardware store. They were out on the plains. So,
So let's take a couple of questions from
Yeah,
our
we're starting to get a
audience.
lot of questions.
And the first one, we don't want to put you on the spot here, but well, we're going to anyway.
Okay.
So Jim Latin says that Stephen Ambrose wrote a dual biography of Custer and Crazy Horse. What does Mark think of Stephen Ambrose's take on Crazy Horse in that book? Don't be in any way affected by the fact that our show is connected with Stephen Ambrose's historical stories. Give us your honest answer.
Well, what I thought, and I read that book when I was a kid. I mean, I think I was, I don't know, I was, an early teenager, and I think what I took away from that the most was that he really compared Custer and Crazy Horse as two warriors, and that was exactly on the money. They were two fierce warriors, and all they thought about was victory, attacking, conquering their foe, and that always remained with me. In fact, even contemporary newspaper reports from the late 19th century, they said Crazy Horse was the Lakota Custer. It was a very apt comparison. It was a very smart idea to look at both those two individuals, because they were the leading warriors of those two cultures.
Yeah. So are we going to keep asking questions, or are we
you can bring in a question?
No,
Chris,
it was your turn.
It's your turn. It's up to you.
Or we can have a drink.
Yeah, well, let's have a drink and then we'll talk. Yeah, there you go. Have a drink.
Oh, fair enough. Cheers.
I don't want to hype on kind of Lakota warfare, but one question I've always had in looking at these wars, and you're just the person to ask, is how are these tribes able to sustain the fight? I mean, because it's not a one-off thing. This is a long-term campaign. So how are they able to keep that up? Are they directing a defense? I'm just curious how.
Well, I mean, are you saying over years or
yeah, I mean, over years, how do they stay intact as an organization? How do they get more ammunition? How do they feed themselves? How do they, because
sure,
obviously once the whites come out, they're driving them everywhere. So it's not as if they can, set up a factory somewhere. I mean, how do they?
Well, they were still able to find traders where they could trade for the things that they needed, and I don't want to get too off on a tangent, but Sitting Bull, whenever he sent messages about possible peace, I mean, he said what he wanted was traders. I mean, they like to trade. He just didn't want all these railroad surveyors and gold miners, and just let us have some traders, and we'll get you the buffalo robes, and we can continue what we're trying to do. But to answer your question, just kind of very abruptly, is that it was impossible for them to maintain that lifestyle and to keep up that fight with the dwindling buffalo herds. And the U.S. Army learned very quickly the weakness of these tribes, and that was winter campaigns. So the horses aren't as strong because the forage is not as good in the winter. They can't move as well in the winter if there's deep snow. And the U.S. Army, they had all the supplies they needed, all the food they needed. And the other thing that they didn't have their families that they had to worry about that they were taking along. The Lakotas, when they're moving along, they have their whole family in the village, and they have to take care of them. The regiments, the battalions, they didn't have to worry about families coming along behind. And they were very well equipped. They had very good, all kinds of winter wear. And at the end, that's what really does these anti-treaty bands, I call them, of Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. That's what does them in. Crazy Horse, literally through starvation, has no other choice. It's either my people are going to die or going to be attacked again, and we won't be able to fend them off. And Sitting Bull flees to Canada. So no, they aren't able to keep that up. They did try, through alliances with the Cheyennes, Arapahoes, and other leaders who were against treaties and against doing what they were told they should do by the white men. they did try to keep together as much as possible. But as I write in the book, even with this large, this amazing village of, say, 5,000 souls at Little Bighorn, they couldn't stay together for a long period of time because of the resources. They need wood for their fires. They need meat. And they use all those resources up. So you can never have this giant, strong force for an extended amount of time. They had to break apart because of the resources that were available to them.
So you open your book and then return later to the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and we had a question about that, but I kind of want to rephrase it a bit. Both Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull are Sioux leaders in this battle. I don't know if it's really fair to say they're the two Sioux leaders, but they are the major leaders there. What roles do they play briefly in the fighting that day? Are they both out there? I mean, everybody's got a mental picture of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And this is one drawn by, I guess, Stephen Standing Bull, if I remember correctly.
Standing Bear.
But what roles? Where are Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse in the fighting on that day?
Okay, well, I'll try to make this brief.
I know you could talk for the next hour. So
Yeah, right.
But I don't think we can do the show without touching on the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a high point of the book. It's Sitting Bull's people, the Hunkpapas, that they're at the south end of this large village, and that's the first part that's attacked, and the force, Custer, very famously and unwisely, as it turns out, he's divided his force. And so one group attacks this lower end of the village, and Sitting Bull immediately, I mentioned this earlier, he's considered an old man chief. He's 45 years old. So he's not expected to go out now and face someone one-on-one. In fact, he was actually told, he had a very famous vision before the battle, and he was told that he was not supposed to fight. It said he could carry a weapon to defend himself, but he was not to go out and fight these white soldiers. So what Sitting Bull does, he's looking after the women and children. He's offering encouragement. He shouts, at his warriors to brave up, and he gives his shield to his nephew. But he, helps get the women and children to safety. Now, Crazy Horse, of course, he's a warrior, and he is going to take part in the fight. What I find really interesting about him, he had a very certain steps that he took with his, quote, war medicine that he had to prepare for before going into battle, and very specific rituals that he had to do. And he was taught this by his holy man, who was named Horn Chips. So he took time, even though this attack had started, he took time to do everything that Horn Chips told him he should do. He also was never to wear a war bonnet or an eagle feather bonnet in battle, like you often see in the kind of classic Hollywood pictures. And there's a great example. There's an Amos Badheart Bull drawing, and you see Sitting Crazy Horse on the left just has the one feather. So he goes into battle with hardly any clothes at all, just a breech clout, and prepares his medicine. He has his followers and warriors who are waiting, anxiously for him to prepare himself. And then they race off and they take part in the destruction, or at least the fight against Reno and his men there in the valley, and force them up to the top of the bluffs, what place today called as Reno Hill. And after they get those guys pretty much corralled, they know they're not going anywhere. And then they go to the threat that Custer offers farther to the north, because it looks like he's trying to circle around to the other side of the village and attack from that side. And so Crazy Horse and his men, as well as, like you said, there's lots of warriors. There's Lakotas, Cheyennes, Arapahoes. There's leaders like Gall, Two Moons, many others who take part in the destruction of Custer and his men. And he had about 200 men with him, and they're all annihilated.
So Rick, can we ask the big question that you and I were talking about now?
Sure. I always say yes. Always say yes.
No, always say yes. I know. So I just want to say that the amount of research in this book is truly awesome. I mean, it is absolutely fantastic. And the question, Rick and I were talking amongst ourselves and about this. And I'm going to tie it into a guest question, but how do we know what we know? What kind of sources do you use? And I want to tie that to a question from one of our viewers. As an author, how do you deal with Indian oral history, pictures on hides, etc., versus documentation and writing?
Okay, I love to talk about this because I used all kinds of oral histories for this book. Now, I want to make it clear. I purposely did not go out and interview living Lakotas. And those stories, they're vibrant stories that are maintained and within those families. And I'm glad that they have those stories. But my emphasis was on oral histories taken from people that knew Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, from people that were eyewitnesses to their deeds. And I'm talking about Lakota eyewitnesses. And very fortunately, we have many, many accounts that were preserved and written down. To give you some examples. So most of this happens, a lot of it happens in the late 1920s, early 1930s. An author named Walter Campbell, his pen name was Stanley Vestal. He decided to do a book on Sitting Bull. And he traveled to the Standing Rock. He traveled to the Cheyenne River Reservation. He interviewed key individuals who knew Sitting Bull, knew Crazy Horse. Some of the best are his nephews, One Bull and White Bull. There's a picture of them right there. And they had very vivid memories. And he spent considerable time getting their stories. He had interpreters that not only he was so concerned about getting it accurately written down that sometimes he would have the interpreters then go back and write down their answers in Lakota. So what's great, and we were talking about this a little earlier before we went live, all his notebooks, they're at the University of Oklahoma, and they've been digitized. So if you want to check me out and see, my source, you can actually go to that website and you can look at those actual tablets where Stanley Vestal recorded this stuff. And so that was those oral histories were very, very important for my work. And I need to mention a couple of women who were also key. Marie Sandoz and Eleanor Hinman. They went out to the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1930 and 1931 and interviewed people that knew Crazy Horse, including one of his best friends, a man named He Dog, who was also an Oglala leader. And those have all been preserved. So I focused extensively on those oral histories. The other thing that's great about this technology, this digitization, since a lot of other authors have published books on these leaders and on these encounters on the Northern Plains, there have been digitized literally millions of newspaper pages from the 19th century. So I was able to find some accounts that hadn't been known before, again, from warriors who fought in some of these engagements that I was also able to bring in to my story as well. And I found some really fascinating things. If you got a second, I'll go into
absolutely.
Yeah. We do.
So in 1873, there was an infamous massacre of a group of Pawnee Indians in Nebraska near the Republican River. They were on a buffalo hunt and had permission from their agent. Well, the Lakotas, the Pawnees to them were their enemies, and it had gone back a very long time. And so there were many Lakotas in this area, and they come upon this Pawnee hunting band, and they attack, and they kill. I mean, it was awful. I mean, there were all these women and children. It was a village. It was moving, and again, they had permission for this hunt. They kill like 150, but they also take several prisoners. And I found lots of newspaper articles, written by an agent or as individuals that were there, and they mentioned in the account some of the Lakota leaders that had prisoners. And one of the leaders that they mentioned, this is 1873, his name was Mad Horse. Well, Crazy Horse wasn't a household name in 1873. And it comes to this thing about translation and interpretation. Crazy Horse, Mad Horse. So Crazy Horse was actually participated in this, but nobody really picked up on this because they didn't, they looked at Mad Horse and just kind of went over, Mad Horse. But no, it comes down to translation. That was Crazy Horse. Later on, he would become very famous, but he just wasn't that well known. And there's other way. I mean, there's several ways to interpret that word in Lakota: mad, crazy.
Well, one of the things that you do that's kind of interesting as you write the book is you use phrases such as long knives for the cavalry, metal breasts for the
Indian police.
The Indian police who are involved on the reservation. 3 stars as the name that the Indians, Native Americans, gave to General George Crook. Is that obviously seems like a conscious effort on your part to try to look at this or get the reader to look at this through the eyes of the natives and not look at it through our own Euro-American kind of frame of reference.
Exactly. I mean, it was important for me to tell Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull stories through Lakota eyes. And that's why I concentrated so heavily on these oral histories, but it's also why I use these terms. And it was important for me to also, you're not going to find a lot of actual Lakota words because these terms translated into English, I think for most readers are more evocative. And, I'm all into narrative. And so a Lakota word, and there's a few in there, but I don't, that can hang you up. And then you put in parentheses, what's it mean? And I want it to flow. And I just love these translations. Like I say, long knives, blue coats. I just feel like they're so evocative and kind of place you there. And again, from their perspective. And yeah, so it was very intentional why I did it that way.
So the other question I had, Mark, is given this book and your others, is there something that you find compelling or useful about biography as a form to bring people into a time period? Is there, because I've asked this question of other authors, what is it about biography?
Yeah, to me, I think it's perennial. There's always a fascination with great lives, with iconic individuals. And, my thing is that, or at least I hope that readers take away from the book, I think you'll agree, it's a very tragic story and very sad. But I hope that they're inspired by these 2 great leaders and what they stood for and what they really literally and ultimately died for. But to get back to your question, biography, I think there's just this fascination for humans in the past, and especially for these larger than life individuals who made such an impact on both their people and on history. And I don't think we'll ever tire of that. Whether it's Abraham Lincoln or Billy the Kid or just all kinds of, countless individuals in the past. There's just that you want to know more about them and what made them tick and why they're important and how they made their mark in their time and their era. So, I mean, I love biography. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it does. And because again, your books are so compelling, and this was, I don't know, there's just something about biography. I'm always curious about why certain people use biography as a way to talk about a subject. And since you do it so effectively, I thought I'd ask you.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, the other thing too is, I mean, to me, it's interesting how, and I talked about the challenge and their trials. How did they react to those situations? What was their choice or decisions? I think we can learn a lot from that, the decisions that they made, and was it the right decision or not? That's why people forever want to know what was in Custer's mind, right? When he's going in and divide, and then what happened in those last few minutes? What was he thinking? It's the mysteries that also are intriguing, and I think there's mysteries with Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull too, and in the choices that they made and how they lived their life.
Not what was Custer thinking? I was just trying to.
Didn't Gary Larson end that?
There's a song about that that I can't quite remember the lyrics to, but basically it's it's not my day, or sure wish I'd done that indulgence the other night. I want to ask a completely apart from everything we've asked about, and this is sort of a side path, but please forgive me this. I want to ask about a character in your book named Frank Groward, if I'm
Yeah,
saying that
Gruard.
correctly.
Gruard, I
And
think.
Gruard. And he is, to me, just this like, wait a minute, what kind of character? Because he's a guy who grows up, he's born in the South Seas of the
Yes.
Pacific, right? He's half Polynesian, half
Yes.
Mormon. And he follows a very unusual path to end up as a scout for 3 stars, General Crook.
Yes.
And becomes kind of a strange and perhaps duplicitous conduit between the Sioux and the Euro-Americans. Tell us a little bit more about him.
Yeah, he's I think it's great that you brought him up, because I've got a good buddy, a fellow historian, and he says, Mark, you got to do a biography of Frank Gruard.
Right, or a movie. He's a movie.
He's so interesting. Yeah. Well, so through various nefarious deeds, and apparently, he's a horse thief, and he has other occupations that involve illegitimate means. But he ends up apparently, whenever he would was afraid of getting caught in something like one of these activities, stealing horses, weapons, or whatever, that he would kind of retreat to a tribe or a native tribe. And he ends up at a certain point with Sitting Bull's people. And, Sitting Bull he really could form attachments with, I don't know how to say it, people that are like orphans or whatever. I mean, he adopted an Assiniboine boy who became, a very close, like a brother. But he also adopts, Frank Gruard as a brother. And Gruard lives with Sitting Bull's people. He becomes a close friend. He also becomes a close friend to Crazy Horse. He learns the Lakota language somewhat. He takes part in their raids. One of the things they loved about him, when they captured a mail bag, well, Frank Gruard could read the mail, and they learned a lot about what the military was doing on the upper Missouri, the northern plains. So he was kind of like a spy in a way. So he becomes very close to these two leaders. He becomes so close to these people and the Lakotas, and he's just like loving it. It's like Little Big Man. He says, I wasn't only playing Indian, I was living Indian or whatever. And that's what Frank Gruard was doing. But then he goes to the other side. He decides, for whatever reason, that, I'm going to go now and help the white man, help the soldiers. So he goes into a military post, becomes a scout. And he even admitted this to his mother in a letter. He says, I know all their ways. And so I'm helping, General Crook in this campaign to end these days of freedom. These are the people that befriended him. And he's actively helping the soldiers hunt them down in the places where they live. And more than one village he led soldiers to. So Sitting Bull later said, and according to one bull, the interviewer said, did anybody ever fool Sitting Bull? And Sitting Bull said, I was never fooled by the white men except for one, and that was Frank Gruard.
So since we're kind of like bouncing all over the place now.
Yeah,
One of my
we're
other
going
off
to
really. We're
the
going around.
billiard ball part of History Happy Hour.
That's okay. It's a big book. It's a big book.
It's a Gatling gun of questions, so to speak.
Whoa. One of the really interesting points you made, and it's something I really hadn't thought about, was you say that, here are these two characters that want to stay away and apart from the white men, but they're integrated into the global economy.
Yeah.
Which really made me go, wow, I hadn't thought about it. Could you talk about that? Because I found that to be a fascinating notion.
Yeah, it's this buffalo robe trade is what it is, because the Lakotas, they need buffalo robes and buffalo for their own uses, but they also are taking buffalo to trade. And this is the buffalo robe. And what a lot of people don't understand about the robe trade, before the Civil War, the Lakota women are brain tanning. They're tanning these robes. So the robes they're trading off, they're not green hides. I mean, they're actually pliable robes. And these are being shipped not only to the eastern United States, but they're going to Europe. And the primary use for these robes is lap robes. In the winter, there's no heater in the carriage, in the wagons, and you bundle up. And so you've got these beautiful, warm buffalo robes. And for like a cup of sugar or a cup of whiskey, the traders can get a buffalo robe for, something like, and sell it in St. Louis for $3 to $5. And when you multiply that by thousands, and they literally were thousands and thousands of rows, which is why the buffalo declined. But they're going over the world, and then in exchange, the Lakotas are getting glass beads that are made in Italy. They're getting brass pots and pans. They're getting wool blankets that are beautiful colors, red and green and blue. So they become wedded to those goods. And that's why I mentioned earlier, Sitting Bull, he wasn't always opposed to having a trader because they liked those manufactured goods. Mm-hmm. And really because they couldn't give those up, that also in a way sealed their fate. I mean, they couldn't go back to what they were before they were introduced to those goods and before they got all involved in this system of, like I say, world trade. It was too late. They needed those things, and they continued to kill the buffalo. And when you add on the white buffalo hunters who were also killing buffalo, the buffalo were not going to be long for this world, and this speeded up the demise. And the military knew this, and many settlers knew this, and many Lakotas knew it. They knew that once the buffalo were gone, it would be impossible for them to maintain their traditional ways of living.
So we should probably talk about the end of their lives briefly. As you say, these are both people who, in their own way, resisted until the end of their lives, although Sitting Bull does, participate in the Buffalo Bill Cody show and meets at least one U.S. president, visits the White House, I think.
Yes.
Which blew my mind a little bit. But in a way, it's ironic, given kind of the modern times. Both of these people essentially die resisting arrest, one could say.
Yes.
Broadly. Give us a brief description of kind of what happened. What's the end story for each of these guys?
Well, the end story is that the control freak agents, white men, are essentially terrified and because of wild rumors that are largely false, but they are afraid. I mean, they're afraid of these individuals. They're afraid. There's a rumor they're going to break out. Crazy Horse is going to take his people north. Crazy Horse is plotting to kill General Crook. Some of these rumors are spread by fellow Lakotas who are jealous of Crazy Horse. So Crazy Horse, they order his arrest. He's brought into Fort Robinson in September of 1877. He'd only surrendered in May, and he's lied to. Crazy Horse is told that, oh yeah, you'll get to talk with the commanding officer, and all Crazy Horse just wanted to move to a different agency. He didn't want to be there anymore, wanted to move with his people. You'll get to talk to the officer in charge. Well, as soon as they get him there, he sees the building they're taken into has bars. He's going to be arrested. And so he struggles. It's like, that's not, what I was told. These people were always lied to, by the way, in various forms, whether it was treaties or negotiation or whatever. So, he's killed, he's bayoneted while he's trying to flee. And Sitting Bull, again, this is during the Ghost Dance movement. And so Sitting Bull, the Standing Rock agent, he hated Sitting Bull anyway. He called him a non-progressive. The Indians that went along with the agent were progressives. Those that didn't were non-progressives. And so he and Sitting Bull butted heads constantly. But when he learned that Sitting Bull, who allowed his people to take part in the Ghost Dance religion, and Sitting Bull was going to travel to Pine Ridge because supposedly the Messiah was going to be there, and Sitting Bull wanted to see what this stuff is about. Well, when the agent learned that, he ordered the arrest. And again, it was a complete, befuddled screw up. And it turns into a melee, and Sitting Bull is murdered. I consider them both murders, actually. And that's in 1890 in December when Sitting Bull is killed. But I want to say something real quick, if I can, about Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and their resistance.
Sure.
And it's a great irony, and I don't know if you picked up on it in the book, but as we talked about, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, they refused to sign treaties, never signed a treaty. They didn't recognize reservations until they were forced to go on a reservation. But because other chiefs did sign a treaty in 1868 that gave the Lakotas most of the Black Hills, the Lakotas were able to take the United States to court. And the Supreme Court sided with the Lakotas because that treaty of 1868, it required for any land cessions they had to have 3/4 of the male population, not the leaders, 3/4 of the male population had to sign off on it. And that never happened. So it's a great irony that because the treaty was signed and was accepted, that the Lakotas had a claim today, and they still have that to the Black Hills, whereas Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse never signed. So had they not signed, had those leaders like Red Cloud not signed, we would have a different outcome today. And I should point out that they're holding supposedly in an account at the Indian Bureau, it's gone to like $2 billion, this settlement. And the Lakotas refuse to accept it. You know, they want the land. It belongs to them. But the Supreme Court decided with them, and fortunately, they had that treaty as official document, a legal document that upholds their claim to the Black Hills to this day.
Well, it is a tragic story. There are many more parts of it, many more questions that people have that we can't get to today. But we want to thank you, Mark, for joining us.
Sure.
To tell us about
It was great.
Sitting
Thank
Bull
you.
and Crazy Horse. And I want to remind everybody that the earth is all that lasts. And the book does explain the title in there if you read the book. Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, and the Last Stand of the Great Sioux Nation. So Mark Lee Gardner, thank you so much for joining us today
You're
on History
welcome.
Happy Hour. And we want to just say, everybody, hang on a second, because we have some more stuff to tell you after we say goodbye to Mark. Don't go yet, but
Yeah.
Mark, we're going to say goodbye to you. So
Yep.
you
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, you're welcome.
enjoy your margarita.
Yeah, happy hour, happy reading. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Chris, we do have some stuff to talk about, to tell
We do.
everybody about. And so I hope none of you have left. Those of you who have left are just missing out. But so Chris and I, as we've alluded to, we are taking a break in August.
Yeah, I'm feeling very French. We're going to take the whole month off.
We're going to take the whole month off. And we are going to, we're still going to have an encore episode every Sunday, and we'll record new opens for them. So we'll sort of still be there with you if you want to, be in the spot and watch. And we've got some great encore episodes. But what we wanted to tell you about is the fabulous shows we've got coming up in September.
I'm really excited about our September
So
shows.
let's take a look at those. And I'm just trying to find the graphics here on that. I think this is the first one that we're doing when we come back on September 4th, Chris, is Battles of Conscience.
Yeah, it's been getting a lot of coverage here in the UK. I shouldn't say here, but in the UK, and a really
Not in
interesting
Belgium?
take. Yeah, not in Belgium. Couldn't tell you because I couldn't read the book. It'd be in French. But it's getting a lot of attention in the UK, and it's a very interesting take on what some of these people did during the war and how they resist. They stay true to their beliefs, but also contributed.
And then the week after that, we have our most popular, perhaps, certainly our most frequent History Happy Hour guest. Yes, Joe Belkowski is coming back for the all-important 5th appearance on History Happy Hour. And Chris, he's going to be talking again about the 29th Division. And this time we're going to be bringing them from Brittany, starting in, I think, September 44 and into Germany.
Yep. So it's great. I'm really enjoying following this one unit so closely across Europe. So looking forward to that. And also, Joe will be able to focus on us some really good news about the 29th Division insignia.
Yeah. And then we have 2 books that kind of connect with the Cold War. And one of them is the book Agent Sniper, which is about this amazing and forgotten agent of ours, a Polish spy, sort of a super spy who's a double agent, or maybe he's a triple agent. It's not completely clear. But that's kind of a fascinating story. And then the last one, and I'm desperately searching for the graphic here to see if I still have it, Chris. And I don't think I have somehow. Yeah, I can find it. Stall for me for a minute.
Okay, well, I could make my big announcement, the news that everybody in the Western world, I'm sure, has already heard, but I want to congratulate the 3 Lionesses for their triumph over Germany in the Euro Cup. It's the first time since 1966 we've beaten the Krauts in football. So
okay.
You go. Good news.
So
was that enough time?
We interrupt this History Happy Hour with an important
little
football
sports news.
update. Yes. Okay. I can see the viewership dropping rapidly.
No,
ouch. And then the last show in September that we wanted to mention and we have coming up on September 25th is called It's about Cold War Nazi fugitives. Chris, we bring the Cold War together with Nazis, fugitives. I mean, just from the name alone, right? That's got to be a great show. But that's another. Those are two recent books that I think are really important. And we want to say just a sad note as we end the show. Both Chris and I have strong ties to Boston, and a great Boston Celtic died today, Bill Russell, 88 years old, a truly giant person. And I don't mean that in size, I mean it in stature and character. He was just an amazing person.
Agreed.
Sorry that he's gone. So please enjoy August. Please come back and watch the encore episodes, and we will see you back here live in September.
Yeah, and shoot us some emails. Let us know some things you're interested in, and keep in touch, because we'll still have email whatever beach we might be on.
And we'll still be posting on Facebook and otherwise trying to be as relevant as two old guys can be. I mean, if Sitting Bull was 45, he was an old man. Where are we, Chris? Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Stay safe.